Welcome back. Let's continue. We are working now with paragraph 17 of Emerson's essay, Worship. He says it this way: there is an intimate interdependence of intellect and morals. Given the equality of two intellects, which will form the most reliable judgments, the good or the bad-hearted, the heart has its arguments with which the understanding is not acquainted. In other words, the heart, that is to say, the way one's emotions, is more important than just simply the head. For Emerson, this will lead him to that notion that how you feel about the sacred or about the divine is going to be a significant importance, about the way you think about human existence. He will finish in paragraph 17 by saying, hence, the remedy for all blunders, the cure of blindness and the cure of crime is love. Now, if you've been following my other lectures on Emerson, you know that this is not going to be a shock, right? Love, he will argue, is the central answer to the question, how do you make the world a better place? I'll continue. As much love, so much mind, said the Latin proverb. The superiority that has no superior, the redeemer and instructor of souls, as it is their primal essence, is love. In other words, Emerson takes very seriously the Christian teaching that God is love. And therefore, one must make sure that one is always practicing love. That begins for Emerson with a certain condition of the heart. It is not some dogma that you will perform out of fear or whatever, or hope of reward in an afterlife called heaven or whatever, but rather one will perform the act of love simply because it is God, love. By paragraph 18, he will have then an observation about what he thinks of as the true fall. Let's take a look at it. The moral must be the measure of health. In other words, the way that we consider our values. If your eye is on the eternal, your intellect will grow and your opinions and actions will have a beauty which no learning or combined advantages of other men can rival. The moment of your loss of faith and acceptance of the lucrative standard will be marked in the pause or solaces of genius. The subsequent retrogression and the inevitable loss of attraction to other minds. The vulgar are sensible of the change in you and of your descent, though they clap you on the back and congratulate you on your increased common sense. In other words, this is for Emerson what we have called in other lectures the moment of transcending and including, moving beyond where you have been to become even more than what you once were. By paragraph 19, he's ready to talk about the rise of science. Our recent culture has been in natural science. And so now we're back to this question of what is it that now we consider to be most important. For, he continues, paragraph 19, for though the new element of freedom in an individual has been admitted, yet the primordial atoms are prefigured and predetermined to moral issues and in search of justice, and ultimate right is done. Religion, or worship, is the attitude of those who see this unity, intimacy, and sincerity, who see that against all appearances, the nature of things works for truth and right forever. By paragraph 20, he continues, "'Tis a short sight to limit our faith in laws to those of gravity, of chemistry, of botany, and so forth. Those laws do not stop where our eyes lose them, but push the same geometry and chemistry up into the invisible plane of social and rational life, so that, look where we will in a boy's game or in a strifes of races, a perfect reaction, a perpetual judgment keeps watch and ward. And this appears in a class of facts which concerns all men within and above their creeds." By paragraph 21, he says, "Shallow men believe in luck, believe in circumstances. It was somebody's name, or he happened to be there at the time, or it was so then, and another day it would have been otherwise. Strong men believe in cause and effect." And then in paragraph 22, he says it this way, "Skepticism is unbelief in cause and effect. A man does not see that as he eats, so he thinks. As he deals, so he is, and so he appears. And he does not see that his son is the son of his thoughts, and of his actions, that fortunes are not exceptions, but fruits, that relation and connection are not somewhere and sometimes, but everywhere and always, no miscellany, no exemption, no anomaly, but method, an uneven web. And what comes out, that was put in. As we are, so we do. And as we do, so it is done to us. If we are the builders of our fortunes, cant and lying in the attempt to secure a good which does not belong to us are, once for all, balked and vain. And in the human mind, this tie of fate is made alive. The law is the basis of the human mind. In us, it is inspiration. Out there in nature, we see its fatal strength. We call it the moral sentiment. Now, this is a huge moment in this essay, because Emerson will make the argument, we don't need a church and a religion to be able to know what the moral sentiment is, because we are born with it. It is fundamental to what it means to be human, right? And again, I'm sharing these ideas with you. You get to decide whether this makes sense or not to you. In paragraph 23, he quotes the Hindu scripture about the law of karma. Some have defined the law of karma as we don't get away with nothing, right? And no matter what actions come back to either help or haunt us. Paragraph 24, he basically says that God's dice are loaded and there is no room, therefore, for hypocrisy. By paragraph 25, he says this law of karma is everywhere. It's in the town, it's in the city. By paragraph 26, he'll say it this way, nature created a police of many ranks. God has delegated himself to 1,000,000 deputies. By paragraph 27, he says, you cannot hide any secret. If the artist succor his flagging spirits by opium or wine, his work will characterize itself as the effect of opium and wine. In other words, we are a product of every part of our life. As Tennyson will say in Ulysses, I am a part of all that I have met. By paragraph number 27, he will say it this way, there is no privacy that cannot be penetrated. No secret can be kept in the civilized world. Society is a masked ball where everyone hides his real character and reveals it by hiding. If a man wish to conceal anything he carries, those whom he meets know that he conceals somewhat, and usually know what he conceals. Is it otherwise if there be some belief or some purpose he would bury in his breast? 'Tis as hard to hide as fire. He is a strong man who can hold down his opinion. In other words, sooner or later, everybody figures out who you are and whether you're real and authentic or not, no matter how you act. In the final analysis, people come to understand and they figure it out. The next paragraph, 28, is a fascinating one. He says, each must be armed, not necessarily with musket and pike. Happy if seeing these he can feel that he has better muskets and pikes in his energy and his constancy. Everything with Emerson always comes back to energy. And this interesting thing about constancy, meaning that it's sustained will. It's not just that you try and be a good person some of the time, but you actually try and live an authentic life all of the time. Sustained will. To every creature is his own weapon, however skillfully concealed from himself a good while. His work is sword and shield. Let him accuse none, let him injure none. The way to mend the bad world is to create the right world. Here is a low political economy plotting to cut the throat of foreign competition and establish our own, excluding others by force or making war on them, or by cunning tariffs giving preference to worse wares of ours. But the real and lasting victories are those of peace, not of war. It's a great line. But the real and lasting victories are those of peace and not war. The way to conquer the foreign artisan is not to kill him, but to beat his work. And the crystal palaces and the world fairs, these are things happening during Emerson's life, with their committees and prizes and all kinds of industry are the result of this feeling. The American workman, and here this is an interesting idea about Emerson's celebration, it sounded a lot like Whitman, of the American worker. The American workman who strikes 10 blows with his hammer whilst the foreign workman only strikes one is as really vanquishing that foreigner as if the blows were aimed at and told on his person. I look on that man as happy, who when there is question of success looks into his work for a reply, not into the market, not into opinion, not into patronage. Wow, this idea in paragraph 28 is that work, he says, is victory. Work is worship, in other words. And this is the notion, I think, that Emerson wants to remove worship from simply the church and put it out in the street. I don't think Emerson has any problem with the religion of the church if it is authentic. I think what he has problems with is how inauthentic it is. By paragraph 29, he says it this way: this reaction, this sincerity is the property of all things. To make our word or act sublime, we must make it real, the quest to be authentic. It is our system that counts, not the single word or unsupported action. Use what language you will, you can never say anything but what you are. What I am and what I think is conveyed to you in spite of my efforts to hold it back. What I am has been secretly conveyed from me to another whilst I was vainly making up my mind to tell him it. He has heard from me what I never spoke. I think this is significant. I mean, I often speak with students and they will admit that they could tell very, very quickly whether a teacher really cared that they were getting the learning or not. Of course, I will often respond by saying, well, when you are dealing, for example, with some middle school student that's a pain in your rear, how do you treat that young person? Does that young person know that you care about them? By paragraph 30, he says, as we age, we hope at least that we learn to appreciate sincerity. We think, for example, of, and certainly Emerson knew this, although it isn't mentioned in this essay, you'll remember in the Sermon on the Mount in the book of Matthew in the New Testament that Christ says, don't pray out where everyone can see you, but go inside of your closet where only you and God can pray together. Emerson certainly would appreciate that one. In paragraph 31, he tells the great Italian story of a nun who was reported to have been able to work all kinds of major miracles and stuff. And so an individual went to try and see if in fact this was legitimate. But he came back to report that here is no miracle, for here, he says, is no humility. The nun who he met did not show humility. He asked her to do something like take off my boots, and she, I'm not doing that. And in that moment, he said, it was evident there was no humility there, therefore there's no miracle there. By paragraph 32, he says it, who you are finally shines through your actions. And the way he says it is this way: how a man's truth comes to mind long after we have forgotten all his words. How it comes to us in silent hours that truth is our only armor in all passages of life and death. By suggesting that, in fact, you are your worship. The way you behave, the way you conduct yourself, that is your worship. That is your appreciation of the sacred. In paragraph 33, this is a very personal paragraph. And Emerson every once in a while will do this, where he kind of steps out of his essay and he gives you a very personal kind of paragraph. Listen to this. Why should I hasten to solve every riddle which life offers me? I'm well assured that the questioner who brings me so many problems will bring the answers also in due time. Very rich, very potent, very cheerful giver that he is, he shall have it all his own way for me. Why should I give up my thought because I cannot answer an objection to it? Consider only whether it remains in my life the same it was. That only which we have within can we see without. If we meet no gods, it's because we harbor none. If there is no grandeur in you, you will find grandeur. If there is grandeur in you, you will find grandeur in porters and sweeps. In other words, you see people through the eyes of the way you think about the world. If you think of yourself as superior to other people, you will treat others that way. If you think of yourself as an important part of this world and everyone has a part to play in this world, you will treat everyone fairly, even if they are, as he says it, nobodies. They are just a sweeper of the street or whatever. He only is rightly immortal, to whom all things are immortal. I've read somewhere that none is accomplished so long as any are incomplete, and the happiness of one cannot coexist with the misery of any other. This is an argument that's to be made, of course, by the abolitionists, that there is no justice when there is any single individual who is in bonds, who is a slave. It's a compelling idea. By paragraph 34, he quotes a Buddhist saying, "No seed will die." And then he continues by making the argument, don't seek a reward. And here he will say, fear God, and where you go, men will think they walk in hallowed cathedrals. We're reminded again of that passage that was very important for Emerson from Gita, the Bhagavad Gita passage, chapter 2. You have the right to work, but for the work's sake only. You have no right to the fruits of your labor. Desire for the fruits must never be your motive in working. Do not give way to laziness either. In other words, it's not that we don't enjoy the Scooby snack, but that is not why we work. That is not, we don't study for the grades. No. Grades come along. They're commensurate with our hard work, no question. But we don't study just so that we can get great grades, so that we can go to college, so that we can get, great credentialing and get a great job. If you're working for the money, then sooner or later, you're going to begin to think that your work is very hollow, is the point that he will make. By paragraph 35, he says it this way, and so I look on these sentiments which make the glory of the human being, love, humility, faith, these are cardinal virtues for Emerson, as being also the intimacy of divinity in the atoms, and that as soon as the man is right, assurances and provisions emanate from the interior of his body and his mind, as when, notice this simile from nature, as when flowers reach their ripeness, incense exhales from them. And as a beautiful atmosphere is generated from the planet by the averaged emanations from all its rocks and soils. He continues, passage 36. Thus, man is made equal to every event. He can face danger for the right. A poor, tender, painful body he can run into flame or bullets or pestilence with duty for his guide. He feels the insurance of a just employment. I'm not afraid of accident as long as I am in my place. It is strange that superior persons should not feel that they have some better resistance against cholera when avoiding green peas and salads. Life is hardly respectable, is it? If it has no generous guaranteeing task, no duties or affections that constitute a necessity of existing, every man's task is his life preserver. The conviction that his work is dear to God and cannot be spared defends him. Well, this idea, of course, is the optimism again. This notion in paragraph 37, doing his duty. The king was in the middle of the war and he's not shot, but the gentleman who comes out to talk business with him is shot. And when the gentleman asks him, aren't you worried? He says, I'm not worried because I'm doing my duty. You, on the other hand, should be worried. And the gentleman is shot and the king is not shot. Well, we think of Immanuel Kant's understandings of duty and, of course, his categorical imperative as we've talked about it elsewhere. Passage 30, paragraph 36, he says that you should learn to welcome pain as a teacher, the propedeutic nature of pain. Thus, he says, can the faithful servant reverse all the warnings of his early instinct under the guidance of a deeper instinct? He learns to welcome misfortune, learns that adversity is the prosperity of the great. He learns the greatness of humility. He shall work in the dark, work against failure, pain, and ill will. If he's insulted, he can be insulted. All his affair is not to insult. By paragraph 39, he says the moral equalizes everything. And then starting in paragraph 40, 41, and 42, he mentions someone named Benedict, who will say, I'm never beaten if there remains hope. And he says, don't worry about comparing yourself to others. He says, your worship, in other words, Emerson is suggesting, your worship is always your actions. And by paragraph 41, he says, learn from nature. There doesn't seem to be any surprises and don't ever be surprised at any kind of coincidences. By paragraph 42, he says, believe in universal justice. And by paragraph 43, he says, take care of everyone. He mentions in paragraph 44 the Shakers, a religious group, the Quakers, who are led by the Spirit. Now, Emerson was very influenced by the Friends, the Quakers, and that this is, of course, going to be a central part of his understanding, this idea of being led by the Spirit. By paragraph 45, he's ready to make some now final observations. Honor him whose life is perpetual victory. Him who by sympathy with the invisible and real finds support in labor instead of praise, who does not shine and would rather not. With eyes open, he makes the choice of virtue, this will sound very much like Plato, the choice of virtue which outrages the virtuous, of religion which churches stop their discords to burn and exterminate, for the highest virtue is always against this law, against the law. He continues, paragraph 46, miracle comes to the miraculous, not to the arithmetician. Talent and success interest me, but moderately. The great class, they who affect our imagination, the men who could not make their heads meet around their objects, the rapt, the lost, the fools of ideas, they suggest what they cannot execute. They speak to the ages and are heard from afar. The Spirit, he says, is that. Now, the idea is that here, and I think Emerson himself was hoping that he could be understood to be a part of this. He says it in paragraph 47. There is a coming change. Emerson was acutely aware that he was on the cusp of some amazing things about to happen in his America. Of course, as we pointed out, a year after this essay, it is the American Civil War. And the tragedy of that war, of course, has been noted by us and many others as well. But nonetheless, the war had to come for the emancipation of slaves and, of course, the evolution of America as well. He calls it a gentle trust that he would hope that his readers would begin to imbibe. By paragraph 48, he says it this way, of immortality, the soul, when well employed, is incurious. This reminding us of what Whitman says in passage 48 of Song of Myself, be not curious about God and about death. It is so well that it is sure it will be well. And then he continues, higher than the question of our duration, whether we live after we die, is the question of our deserving.